Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the incredibly well-documented Stephenville, Texas incident from January 2008. We're not doing speculation today, and we're definitely not doing hearsay. We're going to rely strictly on official data, hard radar returns, and first-hand accounts to figure out exactly what happened up there that night. Let's get right into it. You know, in the world of aviation mysteries, it usually goes one of two ways. You either get these incredible, wild human stories with absolutely zero proof, or you get incredibly dry, highly technical aviation data with no real context. It is so rare for those two worlds to meet. But what actually happens when an entire community says they saw something unbelievable and we actually have the hard, irrefutable data to back it up? Well, Stephenville gives us exactly that.
All right, Section 1, the Stephenville sighting. Let's kick things off with the incident itself to see what local residents, cops, and aviation pros actually saw on the evening of January 8th, 2008. Picture this. It's a completely cloudless night. You can see for over 10 miles. Now, check out this timeline of how the military maneuvers directly overlap with the strange sightings. F-16s were departing for training at the literal exact moment that reports of a massive, unknown object started flooding in from all over the Dublin and Stephenville areas. And we aren't just talking about casual stargazers here. Take local pilot Steve Allen. He was completely baffled. The actual word he used to describe it was biblical. As a guy who flies planes and knows exactly what belongs in the sky, he pointed out that this silent object was insanely fast, had these flashing strobe lights, and was just completely unlike any conventional aircraft he'd ever seen. He even said he saw it being chased by fighter jets before it bolted off at a speed he guessed was somewhere around 3,000 miles per hour. So you've got a seasoned pilot watching from one angle, and then down on the ground, experienced locals were backing up the sheer massive scale of this thing. A local hunter named Rick Sorrells watched the object hovering completely silently right above the tree line while he was out in the woods. Because he was so close, he estimated this thing was the length of 3 or 4 football fields. I mean, just imagine something the size of a literal aircraft carrier hovering silently just above the trees. It's wild.
Moving on to Section 2, 301st Fighter Wing Operations. To keep ourselves completely grounded in reality here, we really have to look at the official military footprint that night and establish the rules for that specific airspace. Official flight logs show that F-16 Fighting Falcons from the 457th Fighter Squadron, which falls under the 301st Fighter Wing, were flying out of nearby Carswell Field. They were actively operating in military operating areas just outside Stevensville. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do military jets fly around without civilian air traffic control constantly tracking every single move they make? The answer is MARSA. It stands for Military Assumes Responsibility for Separation of Aircraft. It's basically a procedure that lets these jets legally operate as a cohesive unit, often in tight formations and without their active transponders on, in very specific training zones. They handle their own spacing, totally outside the standard civilian radar tracking system. Okay, this is where the official story gets a bit messy, and it's absolutely crucial. At first, an Air Force spokesperson came out and said witnesses were probably just seeing reflections from commercial airliners. They explicitly stated there were 0 military aircraft in the area. But then, as public pressure really started to mount, they completely retracted that statement, blaming it on an internal communications problem. Think about that pivot for a second. Going from no aircraft at all to, oh, we had an internal problem is a pretty big jump, and naturally, it made people pretty skeptical. Eventually, the Air Force clarified things and confirmed that 10 F-16s were actually up there on a nighttime training mission. 10 fighter jets. That is a massive deployment for a routine local training run over a civilian area. And it perfectly aligns with the exact time the whole town was looking up at this giant thing in the sky. Which brings us to Section 3, the FOIA data trio. With all these conflicting reports swirling and the public demanding answers, investigators turned to the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, to force some hard, objective truths out of the government. The Mutual UFO Network, or MUFON, put together a really detailed scientific investigation. And this wasn't just hobbyists. It was authored by analysts with real backgrounds in radar and semiconductor physics. They fired off highly specific FOIA requests to nearby military bases, civilian agencies, and weather stations to get the raw, unedited digital data from January 8th. Well, the responses to those requests highlighted a really glaring discrepancy. Civilian agencies like the FAA and the National Weather Service just handed over mountains of radar data without blinking. But the military branches, the Air Force bases, the Army bases, and incredibly, the 21st Space Wing, which literally operates a continental radar fence, they universally claimed they had no responsive records at all, or that their digital radar logs from that exact date had just conveniently been overwritten.
But honestly, it didn't even matter that the military stonewalled them, because the civilian FAA came through with an absolutely astonishing 2.8 million radar returns from 5 different regional antennas. Over 2.5 million data points. This raw data didn't just track the F-16s, it captured every single object in the Texas sky during that 4-hour window, whether it had a transponder on or not. The machine caught everything.
Let's dive into Section 4, Radar Meets Reality. This is honestly the most fascinating part of this whole explainer, taking this huge trove of civilian radar data and laying it right over the eyewitness testimony. Right out of the gate, the FAA data revealed something really unusual. An AWACS aircraft, which is an airborne warning and control system plane, was flying a tight 4-hour racetrack surveillance pattern at 41,000 feet. For context, an AWACS is basically a massive flying radar dish that can see for 250 miles. You definitely do not scramble one of those just to watch a routine local training flight. And yet, there it was, sitting high above Stephenville, monitoring the whole area for the entire event.
And sure enough, the radar backed up exactly what the people on the ground were saying. Hidden in those 2.8 million pings, investigators found an unknown track with no transponder. The data showed it hovering at speeds under 60 miles per hour for long stretches of time. But here's the crazy part. For over an hour, this track flew a direct southeastern path straight toward Prairie Chapel Ranch in Crawford. If that sounds familiar, that's the Western White House for President George W. Bush. This object got to within 10 miles of the president's residence before dropping off civilian radar. All of a sudden, this isn't just a quirky local story, it's a major national security incident.
But here's the absolute kicker. The data showed this unknown object pulling off extreme maneuvers that totally defy what conventional aircraft can do. The analysis proved that at one point, this thing accelerated to mind-bending speeds between 1,900 and 2,100 miles per hour. Commercial airliners obviously don't fly at 2,000 miles per hour, which completely blows up the military's very first explanation. And incredibly, this radar data perfectly matches the high-speed exit that witnesses like pilot Steve Allen saw from the ground.
To really put that scale into perspective, a former air traffic controller actually saw this exact discrepancy with his own eyes from the ground. He watched multiple lights moving randomly before disappearing, and shortly after he saw the military jets in the exact same spot. He literally said that compared to the massive unknown object, the F-16 fighter jets look like raisins next to a grapefruit. That analogy is just perfect. It seamlessly bridges millions of highly technical data pings right back to what human eyes were seeing on the ground. So, after going through all this, we are left staring at a pretty profound question. If an objective 2.8 million ping FAA radar dataset successfully tracked an unknown massive craft hovering, accelerating to over 2,000 miles per hour, and flying on a direct path toward the president's home while an AWACS plane circled above, why in the world did every single military branch claim they had absolutely no records of the event? It's a massive question of national security and transparency, and frankly, it's one that still demands an answer today. Thanks for joining us on this explainer, and remember, keep looking up.